Welcome to Restless Heart Media, an apostolate of the Oblates of St. Augustine. It's thanks to our generous benefactors that we can provide you with this online content to inspire and nurture your growth in the interior life, and to preserve for the Church a traditional form of the Augustinian religious life. Mass is offered weekly for our generous benefactors, as well as our divine office and our daily sacrifices. To share in our mission and graces, you can visit www.oblatesofstaugustine.org/giving. God bless.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Angelus Domini nunciavit Mariae.
Et concepit Spiritus Sancti.
Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
Ecce ancilla Domini.
Fiat mi secundum verbum tuum.
Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
Et verum caro factum est.
Et habitavit in nobis.
Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
Ora pro nobis Sancta Dei Genitrix.
Ut digni et facciamo promissionibus Christi.
Oremus. Gratiam tuam quaesimus Domine mentibus nostris infunde, ut qui angelo nunciante Christi Filii tui incarnationem coniovimus, per passionem eius et crucem, ad resurrectionis gloriam perducamur, per annum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So today is actually kind of exciting. Exciting in the sense that it's the last lecture prior to getting into finally Nicomachean ethics, which in one sense helps us understand more the natural law and realize that there's actually something even rational, not just, something fideistic about our faith, where we just have to trust the Ten Commandments, that there's something divine about them, that there's something true about them or anything else, but that we can actually, with our own intellects and use of reason, discover that our faith actually makes sense. It's rational, that everything is connected. God created the universe, God created this earth, God created human nature, and all of it is rational. All of it is rational, all in a sense is cumulative. It all works together. So this is the last lecture on Aristotle's book, De Anima. And last lecture, we talked about the three types of souls. Do you guys remember the three types of souls?
Yes.
What are the three types?
Vegetative, like animal, and human.
Exactly. So you remember the things you don't like to eat, vegetables, the things you like to eat, animals, and then, of course, us. Pretty simple to remember. So today, we're going to talk more about human nature and what precisely makes us human. But not only that, but on how, in a sense, complicated, but simple, both, the intellect is, and coming to know, or the act of knowledge is. And it'll be quite profound. But again, ultimately, in this lecture, you'll see precisely why even the Greek philosophers proved that the soul is immortal, which is pretty neat, because a lot of atheists today will say, oh no, everything ends at death, all that kind of stuff. But here's the problem. Even people like Fyodor Dostoevsky, the famous author of Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov, would say famous things like, if God doesn't exist, everything is permissible. Everything is permissible. So it's true. It's like, if nothing exists, if there's no such thing as justice after this life, what's to stop somebody who's angry of going out and committing mass murder, like killing 50 people, if at the end of the day, he'll just die and won't even exist to realize he's dead? He won't even exist to realize he's no longer alive. He will no longer exist to realize he can no longer experience pleasure. He'll no longer exist to realize he's been punished. If at death, there's a complete and total annihilation of the soul, annihilation of conscience, then how can you even say How can you even say or argue for the fact that there's justice? How can you argue for the fact that there's justice? Because if someone kills 50 people, what's one death? And after that death, not existing to realize you're dead. Where does justice exist? Where does justice exist? And so that aspect of justice is one of the differences that I'll point out too, and when we're talking about the intellect and its survivability, or how it survives after the death of the body, where Aquinas differentiates from Aristotle a little bit. And it's in regards precisely regarding justice. But the intellect is a really fascinating topic, and of course, I'll be drawing from one of my textbooks afterwards, because I actually think, when I was reading this about Aristotle and putting together a little bit of a summary, I realized that my textbook was kind of a lot more clear, succinct, used better analogies, all that kind of stuff. So I'll give you a summary of each of the chapters that we were asked to read, which was, oh snap, I didn't even put it in here. Book 3, I think chapters 1 through 8 of De Anima. And then I'll give you the name of my textbook and all that kind of stuff that I used for my bachelor's regarding, it was really philosophy of nature, natural philosophy, in which the author covered these exact same chapters, and to give a little bit more examples. So, lecture 8, intellect and imagination. Active versus passive intellect. Imagination and thought, the soul's cognitive capacities. So the question for the writing response today would be, what is the significance of the active intellect in Aristotle's philosophy? It's a pretty big significance. So Aristotle begins Book 3 of De Anima by addressing the question of whether all soul functions have been adequately covered in the previous books, basically last lecture. Particularly sensation, which is our ability to touch and sense with our other senses, sight, hearing. Particularly sensation and intellect. He notes that while the nutritive and sensory capacities, so basically the vegetative and the sensory sensitive souls, the nutritive and sensitive capacities have been treated, the intellect remains to be examined, as it seems distinct from the body, potentially separable. So that's the question he proposes at the very beginning. It's potentially separable. It seems this, so I'm going to analyze it. Aristotle distinguishes between the senses, which require bodily organs and are affected by external objects. Again, when I touch something hot, obviously my sense of touch is affected by it, right? It's hot. It can even burn me. So which require bodily organs and are affected by external objects, and the intellect, which appears to receive forms without matter. Or to receive a form without the matter. That's the big distinguishing mark. So this is what we're going to examine. He argues that sensation involves a physical change in the sense organ, whereas thinking does not alter the body in the same way. The intellect, therefore, must be impassible. What does impassible mean?
Not able to be affected.
Yes. So even, for instance, before original sin, we had the gift of impassibility, which basically meant the inability to suffer. So before original sin, we wouldn't suffer. Suffering didn't exist, at least for us. But really, no, regarding all the natural order, suffering didn't exist. So it's inability not just to be affected, but yeah, to change based due.
Passio, right?
Exactly, passio. We'll actually use that word later on. Where's my spot? The intellect, therefore, must be impassible, meaning it is not subject to affection in the manner of the senses. Yet it must have the capacity to receive the intelligible forms of things. So, inability to be affected, but still the ability to receive. The inability to be affected, but still the ability to receive. This capacity is likened to a blank tablet on which nothing is yet written, emphasizing that the intellect is potentially The intellect in potentiality has no actual content until it thinks. So I'll say that again, emphasizing that the intellect in potentiality has no actual content until it thinks. Aristotle thus posits that the intellect is unmixed with the body, for if it were mixed, it would have some bodily quality that would impede its ability to think all things. Now, when we were discussing form and matter, when we were discussing potentiality and actuality, we had to ask ourselves the question is when matter receives a form, the matter has to have the ability to become what the form is, right? So basically, iron could not become a human being because a human being, we have flesh. Does that make sense? So the matter has to be able to receive the form. So likewise, if the intellect is supposed to have the capacity to know anything it's presented with, that means it has to have some sort of likeness, analogously, to that proto-matter, that first matter, that it could receive anything at all. And so basically what that suggests is that if the intellect must have the ability to receive anything, meaning it's not limited, and matter by definition is limited, then the intellect by definition must be unlimited. It must be immaterial. Does that make sense?
I feel like, not exactly. You were just saying like matter or form has to require the correct matter to receive it.
Proto-matter. And so that's the thing is proto-matter is not actually a physical thing. It's an idea. It's a concept.
Okay.
But we can never really get down actual to it. We can never see proto-matter because if we can see it, if we can sense it, all that kind of stuff,
By
that's
proto-matter,
matter.
are you talking about like the thing in itself?
No, I'm talking about actual like matter without form, which really conceptually doesn't exist. But there has to be something at the very beginning. It's like the same way I was talking about the unmoved mover, is that we have the unmoved mover, we have motion, but we can't identify that middle point that the unmoved mover caused motion. Does that make sense? So likewise, when we're talking about proto-matter and it receiving form, all we have is just that concept. We know the cause has to exist, but the whole explanation of it escapes us.
Okay. But so like matter, there has to be a certain capacity within matter to receive a form.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about the form of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
There must be a certain matter which receives it.
Yes and no, because then we're talking about concepts and their abstraction from particulars, which are particular material thing, then abstracting from it things that are not particular. So I spoke earlier on in this course how we could recognize this as a table. Then also we had circular tables here at the beginning, recognize the circular thing as a table. And then I gave the example of maybe we had a nice, ornate, very French, whatever, with all these details sort of table. And then maybe we had, again, just a foldable table. But we look at both and we say, they're tables. Even though in every material aspect, they're completely different. So we have the capacity to abstract, even from the particular things, a concept, a universal concept of table. So that's what we're talking about. So we remove the particular things, which are specific to matter, material things, and we move to something that's universal and not limited to matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll actually go deeper into this in the second part. So in chapter 2, Aristotle elaborates on the distinction between the potential and actual intellect. Now, there are different names for the potential and active intellect. I'll just leave that there for now. Just as a person can have knowledge potentially and actually by exercising it, the intellect can receive forms potentially before thinking them actually. Don't worry, I'm going to get to breaking this down. He compares this to the way sense perceives particulars. The intellect thinks universals by abstracting forms from sensible images. Now, images, he uses this fancy word called phantasmata, which are basically phantasms, which are basically just images that the mind has. Now, everybody here, think of a triangle. Think of a triangle. How big is your triangle? How big is your triangle? Okay, so there's nothing material that you're attaching to triangle, is there? There's no size. All there is a definition, a three-sided figure.
Unit length.
Exactly. So the very idea you both had of triangle was completely and totally devoid of matter. Do you see that point? So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about abstraction universals, forming concepts from actual material things, is that I could draw a triangle here on this board. I can draw a triangle, and someone out here could take their tape measure and say, this is 1 inch on this side, this is 1 inch on this side, and this is 1 inch on this side. And we can have a very concrete idea of this triangle. But when I told you to just think of a triangle, each side could have been equilateral, whatever. It could have been this big, it could have been the size of this whole room. Your idea of a triangle was completely and totally devoid of anything material. Without images, thinking is impossible, for the intellect requires the sensory faculty to provide the material from which it abstracts intelligibles. So in other words, when you were a child, until you saw this shape, you could not know what a triangle was, or at least been told the definition. But now that you have it forever. Now that you have it forever. Aristotle rejects the idea that the intellect is itself a mixture of elements or a harmony. And this is kind of, if you've noticed anything about reading Aristotle, sometimes he comes up with ideas to argue that we ourselves would never come up to present, as a contrast to him or whatever else. So he has this thing called harmony. I put it in here because he talks about it, but it is what it is. To me, harmony is music. That's about it. So he rejects the idea that the intellect is itself a mixture of elements or a harmony, as such views would make it incapable of thinking all things impartially. The intellect's impassibility, again, inability to suffer change, the intellect's impassibility ensures it is not hindered by the qualities of the object it thinks, unlike the senses, which can be overwhelmed, for example, by excessively bright light or by touching something extremely hot. Your senses could only experience something to a certain extent. If it's too cold, you get frostbite. Too hot, you get burned. Your senses have limits, but our intellect does not. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I think the intellect does have limits.
So again, each side could be a centimeter. Each side could be taller than Himalaya. Your intellect doesn't have limits on a triangle.
I can't think something that's infinite.
Why not?
Best I can do is say, here's a symbol to represent it.
Well, how do you even communicate to me that your intellect can't think of something infinite if we don't even have a concept of something that's infinite?
You can't have a concept of the infinite thing.
Never ending.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There's a limit to the cognition.
The limit to some cognition has to do with our sensory experience of material things. So we can abstract the forms or essences of things from our experience. But nevertheless, we can think of things like substance. Again, I had to sit here and explain to you all what substance was because I can't just show you something that's pure substance. As
a rule.
Exactly. So in that sense, it's not limited to just matter to understand things.
Well, I think it's immediately super obvious and evident that people are limited in the ability to spend time thinking and.
Okay, dumb people are an exception.
No, I mean, you can be as smart as you like. You can be top IQ in the universe, but you still have to sleep. You still have to eat.
Well, that's not a capacity of the intellect. That's just human nature, of course.
It's like how you take care of your body.
But at the same time,
It determines how well you can think.
there are saints that have conformed themselves so much to God that they didn't need to sleep. But anyway, I would love to get there. Would save my caffeine bill by a lot. So phantasmata, images, phantasms. Thus, the intellect is potentially identical with the objects of thought. And this is the big deal. The intellect is potentially, in potentiality, it can become identical with the objects of thought. But only because actually identical, but only becomes actually identical when it thinks them. When it thinks them. So you are potentially thinking about a pink elephant until I mentioned right now that there is a pink elephant. Now you're probably thinking of what a pink elephant would look like. So you saw that there's a potentiality, now there's something like an actuality.
But my mind doesn't become a pink elephant. Is that what it says? Or?
Why not?
Like, I can think of a pink elephant, but my mind doesn't become that.
Uh-huh. What do you mean?
It's still partly an image. I mean, it's a pink elephant plus all the stuff in the room and the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
All that together, that is the mind? Is that what you're saying?
We'll see.
This sort of maybe the phantasmagoria. That's a great word. That's the mind, right?
We shall see. This actualization is fleeting, as the intellect does not retain forms permanently, but must continually think to maintain actuality. So of course, you're only thinking about the pink elephant until you stop thinking about the pink elephant, because then you're no longer thinking about the pink elephant. Chapter 3 introduces a crucial distinction within the intellect itself: the productive, agent intellect, and the passive intellect. Productive. Actually, I'll erase this. This is what I want to get at. Productive is agent. Which is passive. This one, Aristotle will use more productive. This one, Aquinas will use more agent. And just like we were talking about agent cause, it'll be easier to understand the word agent. So the passive intellect is that which becomes all things by receiving forms. Again, passio, passive, means to receive something, to experience something, to have something impact you, right? We talked about action and passion, even back in our Latin class. Active tense was something that the subject did to others. The passive tense is something that something else did to the subject, right? So likewise, passive is something that's being done to it. It's receiving. It's receiving. So the passive intellect is that which becomes all things by receiving forms, while the productive or the agent intellect makes all things by actualizing potential intelligibles, akin to, and this is the analogy, light making potential colors actually visible. So there has to be something within the intellect that kind of flips a switch. So, well, maybe I can use this analogy. When you're trying to make two people meet each other, don't try it, it's the most difficult thing ever. But you have to create a scenario in which they actually turn and face each other and say, hello, right? And so there has to be something in our intellect to have a relationship with the material world to where the mind finally looks at this table and says, hello, hi table, how are you? I recognize you now, I know you now. So there has to be something in the intellect that is active, that is searching for its object and makes it receivable to the passive intellect. So it's kind of a middle bridge. The agent intellect is kind of a middle ground between the passive and then the object. So object, agent here. I don't know how to draw arrows here because in one sense, the agent making the object intelligible for the passive intellect. This is the guy who introduces the object to the passive intellect. In a sense, this is the matchmaker. Aristotle argues that the productive intellect must be separate, unmixed, and impassible from the body. Separate, unmixed, and impassible from matter. And by its essence, actuality. It is eternal and divine, unlike the passive intellect, which is perishable and dependent on the body, which is what Aristotle, some argue, people claim Aristotle argued this, but Aquinas says actually Aristotle is saying something different. What's actually unique, and I think I do get to this actually later, is that what's different between Aquinas and Aristotle is that the passive intellect, at the death of the body, gets kind of grouped into this massive, just one massive passive intellect for all of humanity, where it's no longer about an individual person, nothing uniquely identifying to one individual, but
Who says that again?
Aristotle. It is interesting because Aquinas says, well then, how do we deal with punishment after sins in the afterlife? There's no one individual to punish because then everyone would be punished for something that someone else did.
I think the idea is that in Aristotle, at least, and is recalling ideas of ancient paganism and like cycling. So returning to the earth is, like you said, very just rejoining the rest of humanity. It's like a dissolution, a non-rebirth, if you like. It's essentially like a hell, but it's really in the sense of lacking that divine upward reach.
Right. And so, again, there's two intellects here. And so Aristotle will definitely argue, just as Aquinas does, that this one survives the death of the body 100%. For Aristotle, this one is very much in question, but for Aquinas, it's not in question. Does that make sense? Again, I'll get to that and explain it more deeply in the second part of the lecture.
I just want to say that it's not just Aristotle, it's all of
Oh, yeah, no, he definitely takes out of other people. Without the productive intellect, the passive intellect could not think, just as without light, colors remain potential. Aristotle suggests that the productive intellect is what truly thinks and understands, while the passive intellect is affected and perishable. This distinction resolves earlier puzzles about how the intellect can think itself. We can know that we have an intellect, and we can even sit here and examine our intellect. The productive intellect, being pure actuality, is identical with its object when it thinks. And since it is the highest form of thought, it can think itself. The passive intellect is also separate, unmixed, and impassible. And as we said, he argues that in a way it survives the death of the body, but in a non-personal manner and without personal identity. So thought thinking itself. So what did we speak about maybe 2 lectures ago about thought thinking itself? What did that refer to?
Prime mover.
The prime mover, God, no? And then now what are we saying about the intellect here? That it could also be thought thinking itself. And so now you see a little bit of the similarities of how we are made in the image and likeness of God. How we are made in the image and likeness of God.
Where did you say that?
So the intellect,
I don't know, I didn't put the actual notes in.
the intellect is God thinking itself.
Well, it can think itself. Yeah.
The intellect can think itself.
Yeah. The chapter 3, somewhere in chapter 3. But
If the mind becomes what it thinks, and in the sense that you mentioned before. What does it look like when it thinks itself? It's like a mirrors looking at each other infinitely.
Depends what it is. Depends what it is. So, well, again, I'm building here. In chapter 4, Aristotle explores the intellect's operation in greater detail, emphasizing its superiority to sensation. While sensation perceives particulars and is never in error about its proper object, such as color for sight, it can err about common or incidental objects. The intellect, however, deals with universals and essences, abstracted from particulars by images. Thinking involves combining and dividing concepts, which can lead to truth or falsity, unlike simple sensation. Aristotle addresses how the intellect knows indivisible things such as substances or simple essences. For indivisibles, there is no falsity in the act of thinking them, only in composing judgments. So, if I can erase this. This is kind of what he means about the fact that the senses cannot err, as opposed to the intellect. What he's talking about is what's called, in relation to truth and falsity. What is the definition of truth again? The adequation of the intellect to reality. Truth is the relationship between my intellect and reality. If what's in reality matches what's in my mind, that relationship is called truth. That is a truth. Whenever the reality is different than what's in my mind, that is called falsity. And so you could only have truth and falsity, really, in what's called a judgment. A judgment is something like this. The sky is blue. Period. This is what's called a judgment. When you have a subject and a predicate. When the predicate is saying something about the subject. This is called a judgment. And this is what's either true or false.
I remember in grade school, there was is this sentence a statement of fact or is it an opinion? Mm-hmm. And a judgment seems to be sort of in between.
Well, an opinion can still be a judgment.
Like the sky is blue could be an opinion, or it could be a fact. I mean, right now it's not blue.
Well, either way, it's a judgment. Both an opinion or a fact are still judgments. Okay. One is either true or false. Gotcha. So this is we're talking about truth and falsity in regards to a judgment. Where was I? Whereas sensation, we'll just say, we'll acquire information that simply says, this is a table. This is hard, flat surface, put my books on it. This is what my senses are telling me. They're just giving me basically just the facts. And so later on, a judgment will be a particular act of the intellect later on. Does that make sense? So for indivisibles, and these indivisibles are like essences because they're indivisible because they're without matter. You can only divide material things. For indivisibles, there is no falsity in the act of thinking them, only in composite judgments. And composite judgments are things that are material. The intellect contacts indivisibles in a momentary act, like touching a point without duration or composition. This chapter ties the intellect's activity to truth, distinguishing it from sensation's more limited scope. Aristotle concludes by noting that the intellect's ability to think all things without being affected makes it the most divine element in human beings, potentially separable from the composite of body and soul. Potentially separable from the composite of body and soul. So in chapter 5, deepens the distinction between the productive and the passive intellects introduced earlier. Aristotle asserts that in every nature there is a principle that makes potential things actual. So Aristotle asserts that in every nature there is a principle that makes potential things actual. The productive intellect is this principle within the soul. Pure actuality, separate, unmixed, and impassible. It is essentially activity and does not think at intervals, but is always in act. By contrast, the passive intellect is potential and becomes all things by receiving intelligible forms. The productive intellect, however, makes all things by breaking the potential intelligibles in the passive intellect into actuality, just as light actualizes colors. So if we're in a dark room, we wouldn't be able to see the colors on the wall or nothing else. We would need the light for the switch, the light to then receive the knowledge of all the colors. So likewise, there's this table here, there's my intellect, but I need a light switch, so to speak, in my mind that causes the form of this table to be received by my intellect. I need something to actually grab it, so to speak. Does that make sense?
What does Aristotle say is that like?
The active intellect, the productive intellect.
Sort of building connections, like making sense.
Or actually doing the work, like my mind going out and grabbing this thing.
Right.
There has to be something that goes out. There's that place where it sits. Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's our hard drives on our computer where all this information is stored. There's information that's out here in this world, and there's me that's got to sit there and type it up so I can put it in a lecture. You know, there's work that has to be there's work that has to go in between something being in point A, something being in point B. And there has to be work to get it from point A to point B. And so for this form in this table here to be inside my mind, there has to be something that causes it. Does that make sense? And so that is the active intellect. That is the agent intellect, the productive intellect.
There's a philosopher I studied, Emmanuel Levinas,
Mm-hmm.
said that the intellect, the action of the intellect is essentially assimilation, converting something unknown into something known,
Mm-hmm.
or something unlike into something that's like. You have a whole background and history of things that you know, taking something unknown and sort of applying what you know to it to transform it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that goes on. Okay, so the productive intellect, however, makes all things by bringing the potential intelligibles in the passive intellect into actuality, just as light actualizes colors. Aristotle emphasizes that the productive intellect is superior and divine, existing eternally and independently, whereas the passive intellect survives the death of the body, but in a non-personal manner and without personal identity. He famously declares that without the productive intellect, nothing thinks. This chapter resolves the apparent contradiction of the intellect thinking itself. When the productive intellect thinks, it is identical with its object, and since it is pure actuality, it thinks itself as thought thinking thought. Thought thinking thought. In chapter 6, Aristotle examines how the intellect thinks composite objects and indivisible entities. So composite objects, material things, and indivisible entities, essences and forms. When the object of thought is composite, the intellect thinks it by dividing or combining concepts, and truth or falsity arises in the synthesis or division. Simple, indivisible objects, however, such as essences or substances, are thought without composition, and there can be no falsity in the act of thinking them, only in affirming or denying something about them. Aristotle compares this to the way sense perceives proper objects without error, for example, sight perceiving color. The intellect contacts indivisibles in an instantaneous act, like touching a point, not extended in time. For magnitude, which is continuous and divisible, the intellect thinks it either as a whole or by parts. But for indivisible substances, Thought is unitary and timeless. Error enters only when the intellect composes or divides incorrectly. This chapter underscores that intellectual truth is not passive reception, but active judgment, distinguishing thought from sensation, which cannot combine or divide. Any questions? I know there has to be some questions there. So complex, you didn't even know what questions to ask, right? Oh, let me see if I can. So basically, there's two things that the mind can think. Again, material things or abstract things, right? Material things or abstract things. For abstract things, they're not material because they're abstract, right? And so if they're abstract, immaterial, there's nothing to slice anything in half. There's nothing to combine together. So that's what makes them indivisible. Is that when you're thinking of this table, that's like 8 feet long, you can divide it. It's divisible. It's a material thing. Cut it in half, 4 feet each side. But when you're thinking about table, when we're just thinking about table, if you cut it in half, how much is each side? Exactly.
I have a. I think I would say about that the reason it makes sense to me is that when you think of a table, you think of tableness, you think of the form of table. You're only including in it what is essential for its essence, like what is required for its essence. So if you were to think of only part of it, you'd remove part of its essence, which is to say it can't be what it is.
Exactly. So in most cases, you eliminate the whole thing.
It's just not a table anymore.
Exactly.
It's an essential part of it, not a table.
So in other words, if I were to ask you, divide table in half, you would have to, in your mind, start adding certain material qualities to the thought of table to make it something more particular. So in other words, is it circle? Is it square? Is it this long? Is it this wide? Is it this deep? All that kind of stuff. To make it something more very concrete table, to make it a particular, as opposed to me just saying, hey, divide table. You can't. So that's why we're talking about indivisibles and composites, things that are made of multiple parts versus that which can't even be split into parts. And that's why we're also talking about simple. When we're talking about something simple, it's in contrast to composite. So basically, when we're talking about something simple, we're talking about something that could only be one thing and can't be split into anything more.
You can think of like pure water as opposed to like mud.
Well, exactly. So pure water is just water. It's just one thing, right? Whereas something like mud is a combination of dirt and water.
Yes, also that Aristotle would thought water as an element.
Yeah. Well, kind of by force, everybody did. So chapter 7 integrates the role of images, phantasmata, in all intellectual activity. Aristotle insists that the soul never thinks without an image. Again, I told you to think about what triangle, and you all had an image in your mind. Just as in perception, the sense organ receives the form without the matter, so the intellect receives the intelligible form from images produced by sensation. These images function like diagrams in geometry. The intellect contemplates the universal in the particular image, abstracting, drawing from it, the form from the material conditions.
Is the soul part of the intellect? I mean, is the intellect part of the soul, excuse me?
Yes.
Yes, the intellect is part of the soul.
It's either a part or a capacity, and there's no way to know.
Even when thinking abstract objects like mathematics or metaphysics, images are required as a medium through which the intellect operates. Who was the one who told me that keep drawing, examples on the board when discussing analogies and philosophies? I mean, this is basically what he's saying, that we still need images. Aristotle uses the analogy of a geometer, who draws a triangle to think about triangularity in general. I guess that makes me a geometer, whatever. The chapter clarifies that while sensation provides the particulars, the intellect extracts the universals, and the productive intellect actualizes this process. Thus, human thinking is inherently tied to the body through imagination, even though the productive intellect itself is separate. Now, as I said, the second half is going to be a little bit more broken down than this part. I'm just summarizing his chapters. Okay, chapter 8, the final chapter of Aristotle, and then I'll get to William Wallace's The Modeling of Nature. Chapter 8. Aristotle addresses apparent contradictions in earlier theories of soul and reaffirms his own position. He critiques views that treat the soul as a harmony or a mixture of bodily elements, arguing that such theories cannot account for the intellect's ability to think all things without being affected. Harmony is a ratio of contraries, but the intellect has no contrary and is not composed. Similarly, the soul moves the body, but a harmony cannot initiate motion. Aristotle reiterates that the intellect is not a magnitude, not extended, and not altered by its objects. He distinguishes between the intellect's potentiality to receive forms and actuality to think them, and between the passive intellect, involved in combining and dividing concepts, and the productive intellect, pure actuality and unaffected. The chapter concludes by emphasizing that the productive intellect enters the body from outside. The productive intellect enters the body from outside, like a divine immigrant, and survives the body's dissolution. This immortality of the active intellect contrasts with the mortality of the individual soul's other functions, suggesting a profound hierarchy within the human composite. The divine element within us is not the whole soul, but the part that thinks eternally. Summary of sections from chapter 4 of William Wallace's The Modeling of Nature. I'll actually send you guys a link to the book. I don't know how much it costs or anything, but it's a little bit heady in some places, but it's very helpful in a lot of breakdowns and diagrams and all that kind of stuff, because Aristotle didn't draw any diagrams in his writings or anything, but The Modeling of Nature.
Is this the same one as you said before?
Yes, I sent you like 30 pages of it already in one email. It's by William A. Wallace. So the full name is The Modeling of Nature, Philosophy of Science and Philosophy of Nature in Synthesis. So in chapter 4 of The Modeling of Nature, William A. Wallace undertakes a systematic exploration of the cognitive faculties that distinguish animal life from higher forms, building on a foundational Aristotelian Thomistic framework. Section 4.1, which serves as the introductory segment of this chapter, is entitled Sensation and Imagination, and sets the stage for the subsequent discussions on intellect and reason by delving into the sensory and imaginative dimensions of the soul. Wallace's approach is characteristically integrative, synthesizing classical philosophy of nature with contemporary insights from cognitive science to model the mind as a hierarchical structure of powers, each contributing to the organism's interaction with its environment. And he does a lot of that. He references a lot of recent scientific discoveries, neurological findings, and all that kind of stuff, ultimately to help prove his points. This section emphasizes the role of sensation as a gateway to knowledge, not merely as a passive reception of external stimuli, but as an active process of form reception without matter. Form reception without matter. This is essentially what the intellect is to do, is to receive the essence of this table into my mind and leaving the matter outside of it.
What does he say? What does Aristotle say, or maybe this guy too? Like, when I have an experience, I don't receive forms. It's like a cluster of things, and then I can maybe intentionally point out forms here and there, but I'm not. So most of the time, people are thinking about forms.
Well, no, you don't have to think about form in order to receive a form.
So it's like we receive particularities.
No, you still receive forms. You just don't realize that you're thinking form. It's like when you're playing music, when you're first starting music, you're probably thinking about the actual notes and the actual scale you're playing. At a certain point, you become so proficient at it that you're just playing. So in one sense, we start out with a certain proficiency, and now we're learning and breaking down our proficiency into scales. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'm just curious, what about when you're seeing images that aren't there because it's like TV? How does that factor into this? I mean, is that abstract? Because it's not an actual table or whatever it is that's being shown on it?
No, it's concrete. I mean, whether it's in a picture or in a video, it was something concrete that was captured and is being presented to you.
Right. So it doesn't have to actually be in the physical realm where you are.
No, but it's very,
It can be projected.
it's particular. Yeah,
It's still material. It's not.
right. So echoing what we read in Aristotle's De Anima, Book 2, Chapter 12. Wallace argues that understanding sensation is crucial for modeling the mind because it bridges the inorganic and organic realms discussed earlier, revealing how living beings achieve a dynamic unity between body and soul through cognitive activity. Wallace opens his sections by situating sensation within the broader taxonomy or classifications of soul powers outlined in Aristotle's De Anima. And this was about the vegetative souls, the sensitive souls, and the rational souls. Taxonomy just simply means the classifications. He recalls that the vegetative soul equips plants with nutritive and reproductive faculties, capabilities, while animals possess an additional sensitive soul that enables locomotion, moving from place to place, and perception. Sensation, as a primary power of the sensitive soul, is defined as the capacity of the soul by which it receives the forms of sensible things without their matter. Again, emphasizing forms received without their matter. This definition is pivotal as it underscores the immateriality of the cognitive act. The sense organ does not become the object sense. For example, the eye does not become red when seeing red, but rather takes on its sensible form in a way that actualizes the organ's potential. Wallace employs his signature modeling technique here, introducing an iconic model, a diagrammic representation to illustrate this process. The model depicts the external sensible object as emitting species or similitudes, things that are like and resemble, that impinge upon the sense organ, causing a qualitative change that elevates the organ from potentiality to actuality. This change is not a destruction or alteration of the organ's substance, but a teleological fulfillment, aligning with Aristotle's hylomorphic, hyly meaning matter, morphic meaning form, view where form actualizes matter. So questions. It's got to be questions. It's got to be questions. So the sense organ does not become that which it senses. The eye does not become red when seeing red, but rather the eye has this power to receive color, which is transmitted to it by light. And so it's able to, in a sense, take away from it, again, the word abstract, take away from it this piece of information of a particular thing. So, although, again, I'm looking at this table, I'm sensing this table with my hand, what was received by my senses wasn't anything of the material from this table. Like this table didn't become less plastic because I touched it, because I took in the plastic into my body to then have that as information. But rather, my senses received something from it without the material thing, to know that this table is plastic. I'm feeling plastic right now. I can examine it with my other senses. And again, with the intellect and the soul, we're going to talk about a certain principle of unity within the soul, to where I can use my senses, all of them, taste, touch, smell, everything, and there's a central processing unit a central processing unit, so that I know that everything I'm touching, seeing, smelling, feeling, like I said, touching, all belongs to the same object. So all of it is referring to the same thing. Because if there wasn't a central processing unit, it's kind of like coming together in a meeting and everybody's sharing a little bit of information and you're all trying to piece everything together simultaneously, and then you're trying to figure out who has the actual picture of the thing. Does that make sense? I mean, we've all been in those meetings, right? Everybody gives their 2 cents of what they've heard, and then you all just kind of sit there and be like, okay, what's the whole unifying aspect? What's the real picture here? You know, so unless there's a central processing unit in our bodies, which is our souls, of all of the senses, for them all to go back to, then it's very hard for us to know everything through the sentence of one concrete thing.
The theory of mind is dependent on technology, I think. The central processing unit is the recent technology of computers, but before there were computers, people thought of the mind as like a theater. When movement theaters were new, moving pictures, particularly with the camera, people thought of the mind as a steam, like a steam engine. People say you're angry, you let off steam. So I wonder what kind of technology might be coming, which is more like the mind than even a computer.
No, I was just using that as an example. Aristotle didn't have a computer.
You said,
What?
you said central processing units.
I use that as an example. Okay. To expound on this, Wallace draws on Thomistic commentary, particularly St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, where sensation is described as a passio, or passion of the soul, yet one that is perfected rather than diminished by the object's influence. So you would think that, again, you can only use an object, you can only wear your shoes so much for their very purpose until they get damaged, worn down, you gotta go buy new ones. But imagine wearing a shoe that they became more perfect shoes the more you wore them. You can't go shopping anymore for shoes, ladies, sorry. You got shoes that only grow more perfect, so.
Yeah, this one's great, but it's brown, and I want a black one.
Exactly. So he contrasts this with modern empiricists. Again, people that only think matter exists, no forms, all that kind of stuff, just the material thing. So he contrasts this with modern empiricist accounts, which reduce sensation to mechanical impressions on a blank slate, devoid of intrinsic, in the thing, teleology, final purpose. So again, basically devoid of a final end, a final cause that's actually in the thing. Wallace critiques such views for failing to account for the intentionality of sensation. Here's a key point, the directness toward specific objects. So likewise, our eyes have the power to see and are actively seeking things that are to be seen, colors, shapes, seeables. Our ears are always on. We can't just turn off our ears. They're always on, seeking the object of their purpose. Exactly. Our touch, same thing. You can't turn off touch. Touchables. So our organs, there's a directness towards the things for their purpose. Arguing that Aristotelian realism better explains why senses are infallible regarding their proper objects. For example, sight for color, hearing for sound, because they were made for these things. They were made for these things. Thus, section 4.1 establishes sensation not as isolated events, but as integrated acts that provide the raw material for higher cognition. Raw material for higher cognition, foreshadowing the role of imagination in abstraction, the taking away of the form from the material thing. So here, our sensation just gives us raw material. It gives us the wood, the nails, and the hammers to build a house. Does that make sense? It gives us just the raw materials.
So you would say that, or Aristotle maybe, would say that our senses are infallible because they're like built to receive the thing.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in the mind being obviously fallible, even though it's built to receive forms?
So we talked about judgments before. I mean, it could be mistaken on a judgment, but it cannot be mistaken on the form of a thing. In the sense that if this is a table, it's a table. If it's not, it's not. I mean, in one sense, unless there's some huge cognitive or neurological defect to where you're not receiving the proper raw material, the proper information, once you know what a table is and its definition, as we've all defined it, you know it when you see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like, how is it we can be wrong?
About what?
I mean, like if we were built to receive forms, and
Mm-hmm.
the form is actually out there and we don't receive it, or if there's a, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I've never known anybody to look at something like this and to say that's an elephant and not a chair. Unless there's something that's, again, schizophrenic or something actually wrong with their actual physical brain to where they mistake this chair for an elephant. So the only times we're actually wrong is when there's actually something like, the sun's in your eyes, there's an impediment to the actual senses. So it's not that the senses aren't working, it's that there's an impediment to those senses to seeing the thing for what it is. Does that make sense? Can you find another example of where there's no impediment whatsoever? Like I'm looking at a thing, I'm looking at your book, and I'm saying this is a giraffe and not a book.
I'm thinking about like, you ever seen those flash mobs, or like 100, 200 people will just all of a sudden act in simultaneity in public?
I've not seen it anymore.
And you can imagine, and like somebody's walking through Times Square and literally everybody around them is like motionless.
No, but there's also this, the quantity of information that you're expecting your senses to receive. At a certain point, maybe you reach max capacity. For instance, like if you think your life is threatened, got a lot of people around you, maybe time seems slower. You're trying to react, all this kind of stuff, and things seem different. But that's only because of an adrenaline rush and all sorts of other things. It's not because your senses are experiencing a defect or are fallible.
Yeah, but like people are. I mean, I'm wrong about stuff all the time. Like, yeah, it would be judgment. I guess what I'm getting. Maybe the main question is what's the difference between the reception of forms and judgment?
Well, the reception of form is abstracting from this table, and a judgment saying this table is white.
What if I say it's like, okay, so never mind tables. I'm thinking there's a girl over there. She's real cute.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I talk to her. It seems like she likes me. Wait a minute, dead wrong. I had what I thought was information. I wasn't right about it. Or maybe I could the other way around. Like she says, no way, she likes me, but she did.
This is a bad example. You use women.
That's what I'm saying. It's most of life, It's like 90% of my day.
I'm sorry, but you're in the minority here, so you
Oh
I
man.
mean, like,
Our senses receive everything, and I think our interpretation of anything received to be our judgment.
But also too, it's also your lack of information too, because if you're dealing with a girl who's sanguine, she's always going to seem flirtatious. That's just their nature. They're very touchy, they're very outgoing, all that kind of stuff, very kind. Women constantly think that friendship is friendship, that you wouldn't think that anything, that it could go beyond anything, and so they might seem very, very friendly. But you have a different, you're preceded with that experience with an intention already to look at things a different way.
that's what I'm saying. Is that it's possible to think something's there and happening. Never was.
Right, but that's your own judgment and your own intentions and all that kind of, you're seeing things through a lens. Like you're looking for someone to court, whereas that person may not be. And so you're interpreting the events through your intention, while this other person is acting on their intention, which is different than yours.
Right.
So again, this isn't about abstraction or anything else. This is more psychology.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out where is the difference, what's actually happening between, let's say, raw perception and then the reality that we're never having raw perception. It's always like in the middle of things.
So it's really about
concepts happening.
matter and form, not behavior and intention. So what we're talking about is looking at something in reality and abstracting its form, whereas you're talking about something, a life experience, human behavior, and trying to.
That happen in life happenings.
But that's a completely different thing than matter and form.
Well, there's the matter, which is people moving around, and there's the form, which is the event.
No, The matter is the flesh and the bones of the human, and the form is the fact that they're a rational animal. That's it. But you're trying to apply the same
Perception
thing.
of more complex things, like perceive a play happening. And
Okay,
characters walking around upstage.
but that's beyond natural philosophy. This is a different subject.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? Now we're talking about psychology and human behavior and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's something completely different than talking about human soul. But perception is the actual abstraction of the form from a sensible thing, whereas where we're using the perception here in this context is what's going on.
Right.
But
What I'm saying is, what I'm actually seeing, the rawest thing that I'm seeing is what's going on.
No. The rawest thing you're seeing are flesh and bones moving. That's the rawest thing you're seeing.
Yes.
But yeah.
And everything else is judgment.
I just think it's so integral to experience. Like, it is I think it's at ground level.
Well, no. I mean, if you look at it from a different way, then you'll actually, ultimately, if you understand psychology and human behavior, then you'll, yeah. I don't know. It's definitely a different subject than this is, though.
So Aristotle really is only thinking about very mechanical, like there's a thing out there, I have senses, it interacts with those senses, and then I get an idea.
Actually, I mean, we're talking about intellect right now, but then again, next class, which is going to be in next week, not the following week, but 3 weeks, then we'll get into Nicomachean ethics. Then we'll actually talk about human behavior. Then we're actually talking about human behavior. But again, this is all laying the groundwork for human behavior. You have to understand human intellect. So Wallace writes, knowledge or knowing is difficult to define. But for purposes here, a preliminary definition might be simply the presence of an object and a subject. So that's the definition that we're working with knowledge. Knowledge is the presence of an object in a subject. The object is the thing known, and the subject is the knower. Thus, the presence in the knower of something that is known constitutes knowledge in its basic sense. When someone knows an apple, the apple, apart from the existence it has outside the knower, comes to have an existence within the knower also. All knowing on this account has both an objective and subjective character. It is the knowledge of something, an object, and this makes it objective. It is the knowledge possessed by a knowing subject, and as such, it is also subjective. Another way of saying this is that cognition, or the knowledge act, is not doing something, but becoming something. It is a modification of the knower brought about by the objective possession of a thing other than itself. It is a modification of the knower brought about by the objective possession of a thing other than itself. The natural form of the apple, the thing known, remains the same, and the form of the knower does also, except that it has been modified in a cognitive way by the addition of a new type of form that makes the apple be present in it. Be present in it. The form known by the knower is not present in the same way as a natural form is united to protomatter. So it's not, this actual table, the form of this table, not the matter. The form is not present in me in the same way it's present in this table. It's different. Rather, words that can be used to describe the object present in the knower are immaterial, mental, and probably the most popular way of saying it is intentional, because we'll hear the word intentionality, the presence of an object and a subject, intentionality. It's intentional. Again, knowledge or cognition is the intentional, immaterial or mental, presence of an object, the thing known, and a subject, the one knowing it.
The thing I remembered about intentionality, because I remember that word, I don't want to think about it. Mm-hmm. But what I remember is intentionality just means like knowledge is always knowledge of something.
Yeah.
You don't just have like raw knowledge, you have like of a thing.
Exactly. The presence of an object, a particular object in a subject. Section 4.2 opens with a recapitulation of the cognitive hierarchy established in section 1, which is basically sensation, funny word here, common sense, imagination, and what's called either estimative or cognitive power. So estimative just applies to animals and their sensation. Cognitive is humans and rational. But what's common sense is not what we consider to be common sense, like, things easily knowable that we expect other human beings to have, so to speak, in terms of, it's a
It's good to carry an umbrella in Florida.
something like that.
Or to use the right bathroom.
Yeah, common sense. So what actually he presents as common sense, was to define philosophically as common sense, is actually what I was using the CPU, central processing unit, as the example of. So Wallace presents common sense not as the modern notion of practical judgment or intuitive wisdom, but as a technical term for essential cognitive power within the sensitive soul that integrates, judges, and coordinates the acts of the individual external senses. So sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. They're all integrated into one.
The unification of capacity.
Exactly, the unification of all the senses. So commonsensical, right? So commonsensical. This power enables the perception of common sensibles, qualities like shape, size, number, motion, and rest, that are not proper to any single sense, but are grasped through the synthesis across sensory inputs. Wallace emphasizes that while animals reach the level of per se perception and associative learning, they do not attain intellectus, the power to grasp quiddities in a universal way. Quid means what in Latin?
What?
There you go. So quiddities, what a thing is, the whatness of a thing.
Yeah, if you do that right, they can't answer correctly. You just say it louder, right?
So he quotes Aristotle's decisive statement in De Anima, Book 3, Section 4. The intellect is in potentiality to the intelligibles, what we can receive with our intellect. So the intellect is in potentiality to what we can receive with our intellect in the way that a writing tablet is to what is written, on which nothing is yet actually written. This potentiality, however, is not passive in the manner of sensation. It requires an active principle to render the potential intelligible actually thinkable. So again, that light switch, something to actually reach it and make it known from our intellect. Thus, Wallace introduces the famous distinction between the possible intellect and the agent intellect, drawn from De Anima, Book 3, Section 5. Wallace structures his exposition in 5 major movements. 1, the necessity of the agent intellect, so that which actually grabs this form of the table and brings it back into my passive intellect, that active part. Its nature and way of operation, so how it does that. The process of extraction, which is basically the same thing. The role of phantasmata, or the mental images or sensory representations that are retained in the mind. And the ontological status and immortality of the agent intellect. So after we've discovered how all this knowledge works, what do we finally discover about our agent intellect? The fact that it's immortal, that it survives the death of the body. So the necessity of the agent intellect. Wallace begins by posing a problem of cognitive causality. How does the human soul move from the particular material and transient content of sensory images to the universal, immaterial, and necessary content of concepts? Empiricists, like David Hume, reduce concepts to faint copies of impressions. Rationalists, like Kant, impose a priori categories. Materialists, like Daniel Dennett, treat concepts as neurological patterns. None, Wallace argues, explain the transition from potential to actual intelligibility. So that I can know this to me actually knowing it. Aristotle's solution is the agent intellect, an intrinsic active power so something that's actually in my mind and my soul, in my intellect, a power that it has, that makes all things by illuminating the phantasm, just as light makes colors actually visible. Without this, the possible intellect would remain in perpetual potentiality, like an eye in darkness. It's always there to see, but without the light, you can't know. So they have the passive intellect that is capable of knowing, and then you have the active intellect that makes it knowable. I guess you can even use the analogy, if you have someone in front of you that speaks a different language, you have you who would understand what they're saying in your own language, if all you had is but an interpreter to sit there and convert whatever they're saying in their language to yours. So you took what was potentially knowable, you had another power, this translator, then convert it to what you're able to know. Make sense? The agent intellect is not an external deity, as Averroes claims. One of the Muslim philosophers, they get things wrong sometimes. Excuse them. The agent intellect is not an external deity, but a power of the human soul, inseparable in operation, yet distinct in function. Wallace cites Aquinas. The agent intellect is to the possible intellect as art is to its material. This analogy is crucial. Just as a sculpture actualizes the statue in the marble, the agent intellect actualizes the concept in the phantasm, in the image. So the image being a particular dog, and the agent intellect abstracting from a particular dog or dogness. Something converted from just one particular thing to something universal. Does that make sense? So the nature and mode of operation of the agent intellect. Wallace describes the agent intellect as spiritual, immaterial, impassible, and always in act. It is not a faculty that thinks discursively. Discursively is basically the way we reason through syllogisms.
I like to think of that word, it's a very hard word. I like to think of just changing it to the word discourse. Discursive becomes discourse, the same etymological root.
Yeah,
discourse is just talking to each other.
Exactly, you get from point A to point B through lots of reasoning. So it is not a faculty that thinks discursively, but a habitual, which means just a unique power in virtue of itself, but a habitual light that renders the soul capable of abstracting form from matter. He contrasts this with sensation. The eye is changed by color, but the intellect is not changed by the essence of stone when it thinks stone. This impassibility is what allows the intellect to receive all forms without being limited by any. So the eye is limited to sight, the ear is limited to sound, the nose is limited to smell, the intellect is limited by nothing. Make sense? To clarify its mode of operation, its modus operandi, its way of working, Wallace introduces an optical analogy. Just as physical light dematerializes color, making it visible by separating it from opaque matter, the light of the agent intellect dematerializes the phantasm. So I mean, again, abstracting the form, making it not material, making it universal. It dematerializes it, stripping away individualizing conditions, such as size, position, and time, while preserving the ratio essendi, its reason of being, its essence, the formal structure of the thing. So it strips away everything that could be about something particular. So again, in reverse, when I was using the example of when I said divide the table, in order for you to say, okay, well, this is now the divided table, you would have to add to table certain particular things, making it, giving a length to it, a size, a shape, a material, plastic or wood, stuff like that. But if we start from something that's actual material and just work reverse from this example, we're stripping away from it everything that makes it particular, this particular table, to then arriving at just table. Make sense?
Does it come up that ever, like, I hate to be just a tangent, but, so the first thing we experience is a particularity. What happens when the thing we experience was a cat, right? I've never seen a cat before, or whoever it is. I've never seen a cat, so when I see this cat, I don't think the form of catness. I think maybe animal, and then like the next day I see a different cat, different color or something, and then I can put it together. How those two might be the same. I might not. I mean, you can still know the word cat, but they may be kind of the same shape or something. At best, I guess what I'm saying is the forms require more experience.
Yes and no, in the sense that even if I don't have a name for something, because that's what cat is, just a label, right? But it's a label for something that's actual real. I mean, when you look at a bobcat, when you look at there was something on Twitter this past week, or something about a white Spanish lynx. You can definitely tell they're all of the same family, bobcat, those sorts of things. And just by looking at them, sure, you might not know what to call them, the name, the common name of what everybody else calls them. But you can certainly look at something and realize whether it has retractable claws as opposed to not retractable claws, sharp teeth, whiskers, certain elements that will allow you to expect something. That allow you to expect something from this animal, saying, okay, this animal's dangerous, I should probably, get back, that sort of thing. So you can still abstract the form even though you don't have a label. Society has commonly decided to call it.
Or I might just call it beast.
Yeah, or something. It's like, what you even define it by all of its characteristics. And then someone who knows the name says, oh yeah, that was this. Oh, okay, well that, yeah. So to clarify, it's, did I ever say, so this is not destruction, but elevation. The universal triangularity is more actual in the mind than in any particular triangle. Because in the mind, you possess everything that it is to be a triangle, whereas when I draw a triangle on the board, it's limited to what it is on the board. So in the mind, it's more perfect than it is on the board. Make sense?
Yeah. There's no need to adequate the truth of the thing.
Yeah.
It's already what it is.
Exactly. So the process of abstraction. This is the heart of section 4.2, and really the heart of this process of how do we know? How do we know? So there's a step-by-step model of abstraction presented in a flow chart with 4 stages. Number 1 is the preparation of the phantasm. The imagination, stimulated by sensation, presents a rich, concrete image. For example, a particular bronze statue of Socrates. So we have the phantasm, a particular image, presented to it by sensation. There's the illumination by the agent intellect. The agent intellect shines on the phantasm, actualizing its latent intelligibility, so it makes it intelligible. This is an instantaneous, non-temporal act. So it's not something you decide to do, it's something that your intellect does. You don't have to say, oh, agent intellect, turn on. No, it just is what it is. The abstraction of intelligible species or likenesses of something. The agent intellect expresses an intelligible species, a likeness of the essence divested of matter. A likeness of the essence divested of matter. The species is not a picture, but a formal determination of the possible intellect. And the reception of the possible intellect. The possible intellect, now informed by the species, actually understands man, statue, or mortality universally. So our senses provide for us a phantasm. The agent intellect takes from that phantasm, shines on it, and abstracts from it, divesting it of everything that is material and particular to the thing, and then presents it to the possible intellect, which simply receives it.
I feel like this is only one kind of cognition, like the effort to discover what things are. I mean, maybe that's just what you're going through, but like I said, I was saying before, real experience. I was just trying to think of an example of as you were describing that, and I kind of want to leave out what that was exactly, but it worked for any experience. Like what you receive is the particularity, and any removal of any of the particularities, like little accidents about it, just strip away what the thing was. Like resting with my ex-girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing vulgar, obviously. But just like, I remember a lot about that, very strong emotions and memories with it. But if you were to strip away like the color of her hair, that wouldn't be the same memory. You know what I mean? The smell of the room or something. I feel like it seems to me that the effort of cognition to remember that or to even going through it, I'm not receiving forms. I'm not identifying anything.
I mean, when you're talking about a memory, you're talking about already things that are within your, well, the memory is in and of itself a different internal sense. But we're talking about even that, abstracting certain things about her human nature, maybe about, again, maybe some behavioral things where, again, we have the studies of psychology and cognitive behavior. That you can abstract, say, okay, if this person had this certain personality types, certain cognitive scientists have determined, certain categories of people who, set characteristics, all that kind of stuff. You can apply it, sure. But yeah, no, here we are talking about a certain type of knowledge, and it's a knowledge of real things. Behavioral is something different because, again, talking about human intentions, the passions that they have towards, whether they be inclined towards vices or inclined towards virtues, their habits, a lot of different things. But no, we are talking about concrete things.
I think maybe I'm confusing knowledge in general with knowledge of universals, with knowledge of particulars. Like the knowledge of a memory is extremely particular, and removal of any part of it, as long as relevant part of it, would just change what it is, wouldn't be the same. But knowledge of universals is a different pursuit.
Yeah. So the role of phantasms in intellection and knowing. Actually, no. Before that, Wallace illustrates with the classic example of snub-nosedness in the Anima, Book 3, Section 4. The nose's concavity is material and individual. Concavity as a geometrical form is universal. The agent intellect abstracts the latter without destroying the former. So it abstracts concavity without destroying my actual nose. So he emphasizes that abstraction is not invention, which is what Plato said, nor is it generalization, which is what Locke said, but discovery of real form. The universal exists in things.
It's amazing.
In things, in the mind, and in the divine mind. Human abstraction participates in the second mode, which is in the mind. We're almost done, guys, I promise.
When you say...
I do. It's a teaching strategy.
When you say abstraction is not invention, what you're saying is that the forms are really out there, they're true and real, and
Yeah.
not just an image, then you just come make them up.
It's not a category that we just invented.
It's really out
Yeah.
there. Nominalism, BTX. We're done. Right?
The role of phantasms in intellection. A recurring Aristotelian axiom dominates this subsection. The soul never thinks without a phantasm. De Anima, chapter 3, section 7. Wallace defends the turning towards phantasms, the conversio ad phantasmata, against rationalist critiques. Even the most abstract thought, mathematics, metaphysics, theology, requires imagery. He cites Einstein's testimony that he thought in muscular and visual images, not words, and Aquinas' example of thinking triangle while envisioning a diagram. So this relationship between agent intellect or first of all, abstract to agent intellect to possible intellect, and the formation of concepts, and then also using the phantasms in imagination to then abstract even more things. So again, my senses give me data that my then agent intellect draws from this particular table of just table, and then again is stored in my possible intellect, where I form a concept of table. But then, continuing to verify, seeing other tables, I could then just reinforce that same concept of table that I've always had. So knowledge, again, continues to build. So this loop is dynamic. The concept guides the selection and refinement of phantasms. For example, a mathematician imagines a perfect circle to think circularity. And phantasms ground the concept in reality. This prevents idealism and ensures the adequatio intellectus ad rem. Adequatio intellectus ad rem. The adequation of the intellect to things, to reality. Because again, what's the definition of truth?
Adequation of the mind to reality.
Exactly. So if what's in my mind corresponds to what's out here, that relationship is what's true. That relationship. So again, phantasm, imagination, presents concrete images. The agent intellect illuminates, abstracts species. The possible intellect receives the species and forms a concept. Concept in the possible intellect directs imagination, refines, selects new phantasms, and then the loop repeats for deeper understanding. Again, this is all in the notes. I have all these little diagrams here. Wallace addresses apparent exceptions, angels, God, and the separated soul. These think without phantasms because they are not composite. Humans, as embodied spirits, require the body for knowledge acquisition. So this actually becomes an interesting thing when the soul is separated from the body, and this is why also the possible intellect was argued that it cannot even be active once we die, separated from the body, is because there's no more new presentation of phantasms to the possible intellect, because we're separated from our body, we're separated from sensation. Make sense? So we lose that. Yeah, don't you just leave, man.
Well, I got chat tissues here, but they're not
Okay, so this section's climax is Wallace's treatment of the agent intellect's separability and immortality. Following Aquinas, he argues, the possible intellect is the seat of habitual intelligible species. It is multiplied in each human and survives bodily death, though deprived of phantasms, which is what I just explained. The agent intellect, as pure act and unmixed with matter, is ontologically separable. It does not depend on the brain for its being, only for its operation in this life. Any questions? Yes.
I don't know where this fits in, but I've worked with kids who cannot visualize things because they've never seen them before, like the beach. There are kids here in St. Petersburg who have never been to the beach, so when you ask them to draw the beach, they have no idea how to do that. Where does all this fit in? Or if you show them a picture of a giraffe, they have no idea that that is a giraffe.
Yeah, so the way we know as human beings, again, is discursive. We use that word. So our knowledge is just like, for instance, vocabulary and expressing yourself. The more you get students to read a higher set of vocabulary, look at new words, they're more accurately able to explain thoughts and ideas themselves. So likewise, our knowledge is based on sense experience. Unlike angels, who are, again, non-embodied souls, they're just spirits. Us being embodied spirits, our knowledge depends on our material experience. So yeah, there's a statue, a fountain in Rome that was built after the discovery of the Americas. And the explorers tried to explain to the Europeans what an armadillo looked like. I think I mentioned this in one of my sermons, because I think Adrian was mentioned this one time. And what it looks like is like this Ninja Turtle with like this like body armor, like Crusader armor, trying to describe an armadillo. So yeah, you can only work with things that you've experienced before. And if you haven't experienced, all you can do is use your imagination. You take it, drawing from what you have experienced and trying to create something based on this description. But yeah, we do learn by actual experience. So whether, again, I grew up in the middle of the country, Kansas City. What I knew about the beach was what I saw from pictures and movies, right? But that was an actual physical representation, an accurate physical representation of the real thing. But I probably couldn't tell you from those images what it smelled like to be at the beach, whether it was usually hot or cold, depending on where you were, what the sand felt like in between your toes, stuff like that. There was things about it I couldn't tell you about the beach, but if you were asking me just to draw a picture of the beach, having just seen a picture of the beach on a TV screen or on a photo.
So that's their reality, it's just abstract.
Well, I wouldn't call it their reality. I would just call it their knowledge, their limited knowledge of reality. Because in one sense, all there is a reality. There's just one. And of course, we all each have a limited experience of it. But that doesn't mean that we each have our own realities. That just means that we have a limited experience of it. If that makes sense.
What did you say that said that the active thought was from divinity? Is that Averroes?
Yeah.
I know he's Muslim, but kind of curious.
Avveroes.
Yeah, if it weren't for him, we wouldn't have Aristotle.
So, or yeah, the translations of it at least.
Broken clock, you know what I mean? From those Muslims.
Exactly. Anybody else? Bueller? All right, should we say a prayer? Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and never shall be, world without end. Amen. Mary, co-redemptrix and mediatrix of all graces, pray for us. In the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.